In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, January 25th, here on the peninsula. North Korea says it test launched its new Bulhwasal 331 strategic cruise missile on Wednesday as part of, quote, regular operations to advance its weapons systems. And the South Korean economy expanded 1.4% in 2023 on the back of a stronger than expected growth in the final quarter, bolstered by semiconductor exports. Meanwhile, Moscow says Ukraine shot down a Russian military transport plane, claiming the lives of all 74 people on board, including 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war. North Korea today confirmed its missile testing back on Wednesday, claiming that the launch involved a new strategic type of cruise missile. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil has details.
North Korea says the cruise missile that it fired on Wednesday morning was its new strategic cruise missile called the Bulhwasal 3-31. Bulhwasal means fire arrow in Korean. The North claimed the test was part of an ongoing renewal of its weapon systems and is a regular and obligatory activity of its missile and defense science agencies. Previously, its very similar cruise missiles were just called Hwasal 1 and 2, meaning arrow.
By giving it a complicated name, North Korea appears to be highly intent on threat propaganda, as if it's developing a new weapons system.
North Korea's underwater drone carrying a strategic nuclear weapon is called the Hail-2 unmanned underwater nuclear attack boat. The South Korean military provided analysis during a briefing on Thursday morning.
The cruise missile launched by North Korea yesterday had somewhat shorter flight distance compared to those launched in the past. We believe this time the test was intended to improve the performance of existing cruise missiles.
Experts say cruise missiles can hit targets precisely from long range, but because they are slow, they can be shut down if detected. It's for this reason that the UN Security Council hasn't banned cruise missiles as opposed to ballistic missiles for North Korea. But experts said Pyongyang's cruise missiles can pose just as much of a threat if they can carry nuclear warheads as claimed by the North. Tensions are rising on the Korean peninsula with the regime carrying out its second missile provocation in 10 days after it launched a solid-fueled IRBM on January 14th. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
And further aggravating those security concerns are details of a new report that showed North Korea hacked into a record number of crypto platforms last year. Our Shin Yeon covers this alarming development.
Despite measures from the international society to prevent further cyber attacks, 2023 was the most active year for North Korean-linked hackers. According to Chainalysis, an American blockchain analysis firm, 20 cryptocurrency platform attacks have been traced back to North Korea, which is the highest number of attacks since 2016 when data was first compiled. The total attacks from last year account for approximately $1 billion worth of crypto assets. The number of cyber attacks started to increase from 2020 as North Korean-affiliated groups such as Kim Suk-hee and the Lazarus Group targeted different cryptocurrency platforms and exploited decentralized finance protocols. North Korean attackers have allegedly stolen a whopping amount of cryptocurrency to fund nuclear programs, though the regime denies any claims of hacking. Pyongyang faces multiple UN sanctions as well as those from the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control and South Korean authorities to limit illicitly obtained and laundered funds. This comes as South Korea's intelligence agency reported on Wednesday that 80% of attempts to hack South Korea's public institutions last year were attributed to North Korean-related hacker groups. Mostly to fund its weapons program, South Korea's National Intelligence Agency predicts that Pyongyang's hacking attempts and dissemination of fake news are expected to be more frequent throughout this year as election season approaches both in Washington and Seoul. The NIS has pledged to strengthen measures to respond to cyber attacks by creating a task force team and establishing heightened responses. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, the local economy expanded 1.4% in 2023 on the back of a stronger than forecast growth in the final quarter, bolstered by chip exports. Our Lee Soo-jin covers the broader implications of this performance.
South Korea's economy grew at its forecasted pace in 2023. Data from the Bank of Korea released on Thursday shows that the country's gross domestic product, a key indicator of economic growth, grew 1.4% last year, in line with the central bank's forecast. But the growth is nearly half that of the 2.6% on-year growth recorded in 2022 and the lowest seen in 3 years. The central bank mostly attributed the sluggish growth to weak private consumption as well as small increases in government spending, exports and imports compared to previous years. Private consumption rose by only 1.8% on year, government spending by 1.3%, exports by 2.8% and imports by 3%. In the fourth quarter last year, South Korea's economy grew by 0.6% on quarter, posting quarterly growth for the fourth consecutive quarter. Positive growth in quarter four was mostly led by an increase in exports thanks to a recovery in the chip sector. And the central bank expects the semiconductor-led recovery in the export sector seen towards the end of last year to continue this year as well.
We can see, just by looking at the data released by the Korea Customs Service for the first 20 days of January, that exports of semiconductors rose by a large margin, signaling that exports this year will also see a recovery led by semiconductors.
But will this be enough for South Korea to achieve its goal of a 2.1% economic growth this year? One expert is optimistic about the country's growth.
I'm personally positive in gaining over 2% growth for this year. As we talked about, the domestic expenditures of consumption and investment are expected to be worse than last year. So the remaining momentum drives Korean economy would be a stronger export. The chip market is highly expected to be recovered from the first half of this year.
The Bank of Korea official added that for South Korea to post stronger economic growth this year, both the government and the economic sector need to focus on mitigating key domestic and international issues that impact GDP, such as persistently low birth rates and remaining competitive on the global stage amid the rise of India and China. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And SK Hynix posted a rebound in operating profit during the final quarter of last year on the back of strong demand for high-end chips for artificial intelligence. Our Park Eun-woo reports.
SK Hynix, the world's second-largest chip maker, saw a surplus in quarter four last year on the back of a recovery in the memory chip sector. According to data released by SK on Thursday, the company recorded around $260 million in operating profits, a turnaround considering the company saw losses of around $1.4 billion during the same period in 2022. That is also the first quarterly profit reported by SK since quarter 3 2022, while cumulative deficits from Q4 2022 until quarter 3 of the following year totaled nearly $7.5 billion. An official from the company said greater demand for AI servers and products used in mobile phones, as well as a rise in prices for memory chips, were among the reasons for the company to see quarterly operating profits. The official added higher sales of flagship products including Double Data RAID 5 and High Bandwidth Memory 3 chips were also behind the increase in profits. Sales figures for those products rose by over 4 and 5 times on year respectively. However, SK saw an operating loss of around $5.8 billion for the whole of 2023, down from a profit of $5.2 billion the year before. Annual sales were also down by nearly 27% on year. SK said that it would make continuous efforts to improve profitability and efficiency in sales of value-added products this year. Park Eun-woo, Arirang News.
And staying with news from the corporate sector, growing calls for a better balance between work and life are prompting more big businesses here in the country to experiment with fewer working days. Our An Sung-jin has this report.
South Korea's largest steel manufacturer, Postco, kicked off its new 4-day workweek system this week. An employee at the firm is looking forward to taking every second Friday off so that he can spend time with family.
If I have 3 days off, it'll give me enough time to go on long-distance trips. For my first Friday off next week, I'm planning to go to the hot springs with my family to relax.
This became possible with Postco's new work policy, where employees get every other Friday off if they fulfill an average of 40 working hours across 2 weeks. By introducing a 4-day work week, the company expects to create an environment that is more worker-friendly.
I think it's a positive change to give employees enough time to spend on personal development, childcare, or to rest with the extra day. Having a flexible work system allows us to build a more family-friendly work environment and gives a better work-life balance.
One economics expert says that introducing a 4-day work week could boost worker productivity.
With fewer working days, work is less dispersed, which means that concentration increases and boosts labor productivity.
The 4-day work week has been branching out to different industries, predominantly around IT companies. Samsung Electronics gives 1 Friday off per month, and SK Telecom allows employees to take 2 Fridays off. Severance Hospital also began a 4-day work week for nurses. However, the same expert notes that not all companies will be able to use a 4-day work week.
Only companies that can make a profit from a 4-day work week can do it. So it's important to take into account the different characteristics of each industry to decide the working system accordingly.
Others raise concerns that reduced working days may lead to more stress and an intense schedule as the amount of work stays the same. The 5-day work week has been only placed in South Korea for 20 years. But these days, other countries such as those in North America and Europe have transitioned into a 4-day work week. Whether this will bring change in South Korea will be something to look out for. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, come March this year, the first line of the Great Train Expresso GTX will start service. The announcement was made by President Yoon earlier on this Thursday during the 6th session of government policy briefings open to the public, which touched upon commute time and transportation this time around. According to President Yoon, the gist is to open an era of, quote, half-an-hour commutes to work. The GTX has been under construction since 2011 to connect cities in Gyeonggi-do province to capital Seoul. Korea's 4 major cities, including Busan, are poised to launch similar rail constructions of their own. Education Minister Lee Joo-ho, who also serves as Deputy Prime Minister, has shared measures to strengthen childcare support for working parents in hopes of ultimately boosting birth rates. In a presidential briefing back on Wednesday, Minister Lee said a pilot launch had been made of before and after school programs at 2,000 elementary schools starting in March, that will be. And it will be expanded to schools nationwide in September from 7 in the morning to 8 in the evening. Minister Lee also spoke of initiatives to transform universities into hubs of innovation and regional growth by granting them more autonomy in curriculum design. Moscow is accusing Ukraine of having targeted a Russian plane carrying Ukrainian prisoners of war scheduled for a related swap. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
At around 11 a.m. Wednesday local time, a Russian military plane crashed in the Russian border city of Belgorod. Shortly after the crash, Russia accused Ukraine of shooting down the Ilyushin 76 cargo plane, saying that all 74 people on board were killed, including 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war who were being transported for a prisoner swap. Moscow says it was a terrorist attack by Ukraine and claimed that a missile fired by Ukraine was detected on radar.
The plane was downed by the Ukrainian armed forces from Liptsy village in Kharkiv region using an anti-aircraft missile system. The radar facilities of the Russian aerospace forces observed the launch of 2 Ukrainian missiles.
Ukraine was careful in its response to Russia's accusation. Its military command said it regarded Russian military aircraft approaching Belgorod as legitimate targets, but stopped short of acknowledging that it had fired at the plane. It added that it has seen an increased intensity of shelling by Russia, which had correlated with an increase in the number of military transport aircraft that have recently been heading to the Belgorod airfield. POWs from both sides were scheduled to be swapped at the border checkpoint. The chairman of Russia's lower house of parliament's defense committee claimed that Ukrainian forces fired 3 missiles to prevent a prisoner exchange. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Wednesday that he had requested an emergency UN Security Council meeting following the crash. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The International Court of Justice will respond on Friday to South Africa's filing of a case against Israel's alleged genocide of people in Gaza. The UN's top court says its panel of 17 judges will, however, not address the allegation of genocide, but instead explore prospects of emergency measures to halt Israel's military operation in Gaza. Earlier this month, South Africa asked the court to order an emergency halt of Israel's offensive in Gaza, which it called a state-led genocide. Meanwhile, prospects of a temporary suspension in armed conflict between Israel and Hamas are looking likely, but hurdles remain. Our Choi Min-jung explains.
Israel and Hamas have broadly agreed in principle to exchange Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners during a 30-day ceasefire. This is according to Reuters on Tuesday, which added that the plan is being held up by Israel and Hamas's differences over ways to bring a permanent end to the war. The report noted that mediation efforts have been led by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt in recent weeks, focusing on ways to release Israeli hostages in return for the release of Palestinian prisoners, more aid into Gaza, and a break in the war. Citing an anonymous source, Reuters reported that Hamas had initially proposed a months-long pause, but the period was narrowed down to 1 month due to Israel's refusal. Multiple sources said that Hamas has since refused to pursue the plans until it was guaranteed a permanent ceasefire in the future. Almost 4 months on, Hamas has killed around 1,200 Israelis and captured about 240 hostages. Of these, 105 were released during the temporary ceasefire last November, while some have died. Approximately 130 hostages are believed to be currently detained by Hamas. Israel has killed more than 25,000 Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently reiterated that only, quote, total victory over Hamas would end the war. However, he is under growing pressure to reach an agreement with his cabinet and the families of more than 100 hostages still captured by Hamas. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In Argentina, the country's largest labor union, the General Confederation of Labor, began a 12-hour strike in the capital, Buenos Aires, on Wednesday to protest new President Javier Milei's economic and labor reforms. The 12-hour strike began at noon local time on Wednesday, with tens of thousands of workers demonstrating in the capital and other cities across the country. The CGT coordinated the strike in response to Milei's 2 major reforms: a mega decree aimed at reducing the power of unions and deregulating Argentina's economy, and an omnibus bill that proposes extensive reforms for political, fiscal, social, and administrative policy. Mass strikes limited the operation of banks, public services, transport, hospitals, and businesses throughout the day. Aerolíneas Argentinas reportedly cancelled 267 flights as aeronautical unions joined the strike, affecting more than 17,000 travelers. British billionaire Joe Lewis in New York federal court on Wednesday pleaded guilty to securities fraud related to insider trading. Lewis, whose family trust owns the English Premier League football team Tottenham Hotspur, has admitted to sharing non-public information to friends and associates and apologized to a judge, commenting that he was embarrassed of his misconduct. The 86-year-old billionaire was accused last July by New York attorney Damian Williams of giving friends, including his romantic partners, assistants, personal pilots, inside information about companies in which he invested in. Lewis was charged with 16 counts of securities fraud and 3 counts of conspiracy by federal prosecutors. According to Forbes, the founder of investment firm Tavistock Group has a net worth of $6.2 billion. Lewis has been released on a $300 million bail, using his luxury assets as security. According to the prosecutor's statement, Lewis and his company, Broad Bay Limited, will pay over $50 million in fines, with a prison sentence between 18 and 24 months expected. Lewis's sentencing is scheduled for the 28th of March. A breakthrough gene therapy has helped an 11-year-old deaf boy recover his hearing. According to Dr. John Jamila of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia on Wednesday, the patient, Assam Dam, now has a mild to moderate hearing impairment after previously living his life in silence. Assam, a Moroccan boy who lives with his family in Barcelona, Spain, traveled to Philadelphia to undergo the experimental treatment last September. The treatment, including surgery in October, involved the insertion of properly functioning otoferlin genes into the boy's inner ear. Assam now says, "There is no sound that I don't like." In Brazil, indigenous Amazon leaders are promoting a reforestation program to restore degraded areas of the rainforest. According to Brazilian agricultural research agency Embrapa on Wednesday, an online learning program called Sowing Forests on Indigenous Lands was launched to spread knowledge on how to collect, germinate, and store tree seeds to boost the Amazon's recovery. The initiative was launched by Kayapo chief Raoni Metuktire, an environmental campaigner for the Amazon, and Chief Almir of the Surui people, with support from the French government. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Hope you're well covered up. The extreme cold continues today, with cold wave alerts remaining in place for central parts of the country and Gyeongsang-Pukto province. But at least afternoon highs are forecast to be a few degrees higher, but the biting winds will make it feel like below zero all day in Seoul. But the cold snap will ease off tomorrow afternoon. Athletes at the youth games in Gangwon-do had a freezing start to the day. Pyeongchang nearing minus 20 degrees Celsius this morning. Then highs will go up slightly higher than Wednesday under sunny skies. Afternoon highs should be 2 to 5 degrees higher in most places. Seoul topping out at the freezing mark, Gwangju at 2 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Sunny skies are expected except in the mountains regions on Jeju and Ulleungdo and Dokdo, with more snow in the forecast. But after this round of the cold snap comes to an end tomorrow, we could say the coldest part of the season is over. So hang in there. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, and that ends Thursday's afternoon newscast. We have our panel session coming up right after this break, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.